Where there are devils, advocates will always be close behind. A pattern as old as the stories themselves. For every monster feared, there's always the question of why. How did they become what they are? What made them choose violence over mercy? And if forced to stand in their shoes, might we have chosen differently? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Neverland Book Club. Today we're discussing forgiveness reserved for villains with a new series I like to call Your Obsessions Explained, which are really just my obsessions dissected. But that wasn't a very good title, so we're going with this one. I'd like to dive into the reasoning behind why we so cherish the morally gray characters, and why their appeal is most often beyond that of the hero. Art imitates life, and life can be messy. The life of man is wrapped in misunderstood pain, painted and masked with the most vibrant of colors. What a gift it is to be alive. What a curse it is to have never asked for it. There is no black and white when it comes to the scales of reason or resolve. If our decisions make up who we are, do they not color our perception of the world in return, causing everything to muddle into shades of gray? This phenomenon, the ability to empathize with reason rather than merely judge outcome, is, I believe, the foundation for our love of the morally gray character. Since we are not always creatures of logic first, we need context, and context can change everything. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to make it clear that these are the opinions of one woman in a sea of people with their own thoughts at a time in the world that may seem uneasy for many. So please don't take everything we say here today at face value. This is meant to be a thought experiment / video essay with the sole purpose of tickling the mind a bit, giving you a break from the pull of scrolling on your phone and step back from the stories you love so much to try and make sense of what makes you, as the consumer, the target audience. Because, I don't know, unlike a lot of people right now, I don't always hate being targeted where art is concerned. If my demographic, whether that be my age or my gender or my hair texture, is meant for a certain niche, I don't mind knowing. I get FOMO sometimes. Anyway, back to the topic. I came up with the idea for this video while watching the Chainsaw Man Reze Arc film recently. And if you're not familiar with Chainsaw Man or don't watch anime in general, just what the fuck are you doing? So not only was the movie an amazing success, and rightfully so, the story, the writing, the animation, the soundtrack, the action, the heartache, all of it is just perfect. But at one point I said something out loud to Pablo sitting next to me that I know we've all thought at some point while watching a villain's redemption arc unfold. So are we just gonna forgive them? And the answer, sweepingly for the most part, is yes. Forgiveness in fiction is far more palatable than it is in real life. We need certain characters to forgive others because as the viewer, as the reader, as the audience, we sometimes, not always, understand the full picture. We see the painting from all four corners and realize why the frame is shaped just so. In real life, it's difficult to be so objective. Our feelings can be hurt, our pride wounded, our egos bruised. So the question becomes, what makes an antagonist redeemable? Why does motive matter? Where exactly is the moral line we draw in the sand? And can it be crossed? Let's start with the more obvious reasons we love villains, just to get it out of the way. Generally, heroes are aspirational, while villains are honest. Heroes represent who we think we should be, and villains represent who we're afraid we can be. They're both a mirror. The choice is ours which glass to look through. Villains are allowed to express rage, grief, obsession, jealousy, emotions the patriarchal society encourages us to suppress. When an antagonist or villain articulates these painful emotions clearly, it can sometimes be raw and beautiful. It resonates with us as the consumer, not always because we agree with their actions, but because we can recognize and understand the emotion and reasoning behind them. That recognition is the first crack in the moral armor. Our forgiveness doesn't just come from justification, but empathy. And this is where the balance may lie. Consider Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Not my dog, the character, although isn't he cute? One of my favorite characters of all time. Zuko is quite literally a blueprint for the perfect redemption arc. Banished, scarred, desperate for purpose and approval, guided by his misbeliefs both about the world and within himself, His cruelty isn't born from ambition alone, but from shame and fear. We don't forgive Zuko because he's harmless. We know he's not. We forgive him because we understand the reasoning behind his actions, even if we don't always agree with them. His journey from banished prince of the Fire Nation to fire-bending teacher to the Avatar is one of self-discovery and self-enlightenment. Hell, he almost died from doing a good deed in Book 2. Ever the dramatic prince. Okay, but now let's consider his sister, Azula. Azula never receives the same redemption. And yet, do we not feel for her too, in the end? Behind closed doors, we see a child raised to believe love is conditional, power is survival, and vulnerability is weakness. Her breakdown after the final battle is one of the most haunting moments in kids' television, in my opinion, because it forced us to confront a truth we would have rather avoided. That some villains perhaps can't be forgiven. Not because they are beyond saving, but because no one ever taught them how. The fall of Azula and her father is satisfying to watch, but not at all for the same reasons. Because on the scale of evil, there's a tipping point where intentions become pure. Pure evil, that is. But of course, we're not here to talk about those shades of solid darkness. We're here to swim in the gray. Which brings me to my next point, morally gray characters in romance. Going from a kids show to romance is jarring, but stick with me. And I know I'm not the only one who had a crush on Zuko, okay? Anyway, close your eyes, take a moment, and just think about a morally gray character in romance. Not just books, but shows and films too. Go ahead, close your eyes, take a minute. Who'd you picture? Did you think of Damon Salvatore? Because girl, me too. I was one of those high schoolers that actually read the Vampire Diaries series and then watched every single episode as it released every Thursday night on the CW from 2009 on. And if you ask me why, then or now, there will forever be that one reason. Damon Salvatore. The ideas he represents as a character are conflicting with that of his words and his actions. His unending longing, not just romantically, but existentially, his desire to be forgiven and chosen after the worst versions of himself is known. I was a goner for it. And perhaps it started even younger for me when I watched Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer burn on that cross, searching for a soul so he might be loved by a woman he longed to be worthy for. Oh, these boys, man. Can you tell I have a type? The morally gray character becomes a vessel for validation, proof that mistakes do not make one completely unlovable. The desire does not evaporate in the aftermath of failure, and love without condition or judgment is real and attainable. It's not about excusing behavior, but believing redemption is possible. We see it in every monster or sci-fi romance, every taboo trope. It's all about overcoming that evil that no doubt festers in us all, and coming out the other end as human as possible. Now, here's where it gets a little more interesting. Not all villains believe they're in the wrong. In fact, I'd say some of the most compelling antagonists operate with a clear conscience, which can be even more terrifying. In their mind, they're not monsters at all. They're necessary. Some obvious examples of this are the Joker or Eric Killmonger from Black Panther. Now, I understand it's difficult to hate his character because, hello, Michael B. Jordan, hello, arms. And I might really ruffle some feathers by saying this, and please feel free to share your opinions in the comments too, but I don't think Killmonger's ideologies were entirely wrong. It was his execution that was flawed. And that's what made him dangerous, because when the villain's logic mirrors reality too closely, it can be more than just a little uncomfortable to condemn them outright. We're now forced to ask whether our outrage is focused more on morality or proximity. Bringing it back to Chainsaw Man for just a moment, because I think what they did with Reze's arc was genius and the perfect blueprint for storytelling. Sometimes the obvious villain is actually a decoy. We're all familiar here with the villain tropes. There are more common ones, such as protecting a loved one, the whole "I'd burn the world for you" villain that's so predominant in dark romances. There's also the greater good villain we see most commonly used in superhero dynamics. Villains committing atrocious acts today in the name of a better tomorrow. And then we may see the hero turned villain origin story. Villains that are in too deep given their objective and find that they've uh-oh'd themselves into a corner with no room to turn back now. Okay, what does this have to do with Chainsaw Man? Well, we see with each and every one of these tropes that the true evil, the pure kind, is always hiding in the shadows, watching. Whether that evil be another character, an organization, the government, capitalism. Let's talk a little bit about forgiveness within story structure. We love characters who live in the morally gray areas because pure evil is just boring. Flat villains are easy to defeat. Good will always conquer over evil, blah, blah, blah. At least it will in fiction. But complex villains are harder to dismiss. They're harder to grapple with, harder to write a protagonist around. Severus Snape or Jaime Lannister complicate our framework, forcing us to hold contradiction in our hands without having to resolve it neatly. And as humans, we crave complexity. We need it in our stories as a reflection of the chaos of real life, and thematically as closure. Forgiveness, even off-screen or off-page, provides emotional resolution. You know that feeling when you're driving home from the cinema after having watched a film that really made you feel something? Or returning a finished book to the shelf, wrapping the dust jacket back on and sliding it back into place with such satisfaction, yet such emptiness at the same time? Stories like this stay with us after their conclusion because we're still making our decisions about the characters. We're analyzing their choices in the background of our minds and deciphering our own impulses on characters we've just left behind. This decision, this forgiveness, provides emotional resolution. It doesn't erase the harm they've caused to our protagonists, but perhaps reframes it, allowing the story to move past the question of good and evil, right and wrong, and rot instead in unresolved pain. In fiction, we need closure more than justice. I've mentioned this a few times before, and R.F. Kuang is particularly skilled at writing characters like this. With the Poppy War trilogy and Babel, I'm reading Catabasis now, but I'm sure it's there as well. She writes the ending the story needs, not what a reader may want. Now, of course, there are limits to forgiveness, especially where the question of evil is concerned. As I've said, some villains are just not redeemable. I'm looking at you, Joe Goldberg. And not because they lack tragic backstories, but because their narratives use that trauma as a shield. Joe's childhood neglect is repeatedly invoked as an excuse to escalate and justify his violence, often bypassing the genuine reckoning he deserves as a result of his actions. I also think of Maria in Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. The drastic nature of her actions came from a place of desperation due to her circumstances, the distress of her forced predicament. This crutch of trauma used as justification rather than context is what sets these villains apart. The harm they cause is minimized, rushed past, or emotionally sidelined. When we're asked to forgive a character despite their lack of remorse, without them exhibiting any meaningful change, that lack of an arc, lack of development, is the difference. This is where forgiveness can feel more manipulative rather than earned. When we're presented with exemption in the place of accountability, forgiveness becomes uncomfortable when demanded, especially in the wake of a silenced victim, prioritizing the villain's pain over the harm they've caused. And us as the audience must think critically. Not every antagonist deserves absolution. And that's the tragedy. The fact that forgiveness is unreachable. Now, where do we draw the line? We play judge and jury in this sense, determining a character's sentence in our minds. And this is when the mirror is placed before us. Because the truth is, we don't forgive characters based on objective morality alone. No, I believe it's far more human than that. What sets us apart from the logical minds of animals and their routines is our ability to form complex thoughts. Our practiced empathy is what makes us human, and as humans, we tend to care more about the why rather than the simple mechanical details of the how. And that's how these morally gray characters are tools. They endure because they live within that empty space of contradiction we find ourselves so uncomfortable. They serve as a reminder that purity and goodness are not one and the same. And that forgiveness, even seemingly undeserved at times, can be both powerful and dangerous. Because if we can forgive the villains of our stories, what does that mean for us? I hope this video opened your mind to that of the villain. Being a lover of antagonists myself, I've almost always wanted to see stories from as many perspectives as possible. Because only then can you make a decision for yourself who the hero of your story truly is. This video wasn't meant to be for only writers or only readers. It was meant to make you think reflect, and decide for yourself. There are countless examples of the morally gray character. I know I used a lot of film and TV examples in this video, but a few of my favorite books that use this include One for My Enemy by Blvd and just about every other book by her. The Atlas Six being a good example of evil for the greater good. There's also the obvious examples in ACOTAR and Throne of Glass, Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows, all with a touch her and you die vibe that just gets us girlies going. I mentioned R.F. Kuang, Babel, and the Poppy War trilogy, but then there's characters like Luke in The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Though he might be an obvious villain in her story, I believe the true evil V.E. Schwab meant to portray was loneliness. I mentioned Maria in Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. In Divine Rivals and the Night Circus, the true villain is the system threatening to keep our characters apart, despite there being a very clear evil entity devising it all. Now, in more lit fic reads such as The Secret History by Donna Tartt and If We Were Villains by Emil Rio, these characters are victims of the I never meant for it to go this far flavor of villain. I'm also seeing a pattern of my favorite authors and stories paralleled with these characters, but that doesn't surprise me one bit. If you have any suggestions or examples you feel I've missed, please drop them in the comments down below. I'm sure I'm not the only one who'd appreciate it. And all of the titles we've discussed today will be linked down below. If you're interested in using those links, they do give the channel a little kickback, so thank you in advance if you do. These videos are not sponsored yet, and everything is a labor of love, so yeah, that's all I have for you, rude. All right, that's all I have for you today, dear viewers. Thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and like this video if you ever had a crush on a morally gray character, and if you're not subscribed, consider it. I plan on posting more of this series, Your Obsessions Explained. So be sure to click that bell to be notified next time I can't stop yapping about yet another topic that has me up all night. Today's shout out goes to Cronus the Titan. Meghan Markle? I don't see it. Though I would consider myself a princess, so maybe that's it. Oh, and because I have to plug it every time I make a video now, I wrote a book. It's linked down below. Contemporary romance, very smutty. You know by now. All right, I'm off to go rewatch all of the Vampire Diaries to fill that void. Stay lost, keep reading. Goodbye. Are you seeing Damon Salvatore too? Because so am I.